Hey everyone, Flo from Off to Lens here, and today we're going to do a breakdown of my latest travel video, Frames of New York. I've had a lot of questions about that one in particular. If you haven't watched it, I suggest you do it now, it's only 6 minutes. And by the way, thank you so much for the positive feedback. So in this video, I will talk about how I filmed it, the composition and the intent behind the frames of course, but also the gear that I used and how I shot this during a personal trip. I will also talk about shooting handheld and stabilizing in post, and about denoising some of the nighttime shots. And there will be a section on color grading as well. As always, before I start, don't forget to subscribe to see more videos like this one, and let's get into it. This video is sponsored by FilmConvert. As always, I like to give a bit of context before I get into the breakdown. So this was actually a personal trip, and it was a trip that I did with my mom to celebrate her retirement. She has always wanted to go there, but she liked the idea of going with me so I could kind of like show her around and also spend some time together. When I was a kid, we used to travel just the two of us, so this was a nice experience. Plus, who would say no to a trip to New York? From the moment I knew that we were going, I thought about how I could capture this trip and do it differently than I did 10 years ago when I had the OG BMCC6K. So this trip happened in November 2023 and we were there for 5 full days. I love that time of year, and autumn is my favorite season. You get that special light and also all the colors in the trees, especially in Central Park. As this was a personal trip, I didn't shoot that much. I shot a few times each day and overall ended up only shooting 54 minutes of footage. But the fact that I had been there before helped me in knowing where to go and when to go and how to get the shots that I wanted. I had a rough itinerary with like big touristic milestones like the Empire State Buildings, the Rockefeller, things like that, but also specific spots that I knew I wanted to either shoot for the first time or revisit. Now let's talk about the gear. So as you know, I used the new Blackmagic Cinematography 6K, the full frame one. Shooting open gate in New York was perfect. I think it really suited that aspect ratio to get the height of the buildings. In terms of lenses, I only had one lens, the 24-105 Canon f4 IS. I actually brought with me my Contact Zeiss 28mm 2.8 and even a Sigma zoom, the 24-70 2.8. But I kind of like knew already before leaving that the 24-105 would give me the best range and will allow me to be quicker. So the reason I brought the other two lenses was in case I needed low light shots at 2.8 instead of f4. But on the first night, I shot some shots at f4 and I was like, this is more than enough. Plus, this lens also has IS, and since I didn't bring a tripod or a gimbal, this was very useful as well. I did have an Nisi VND at the front, like you can see here, because this camera does not have internal NDs. So this allowed me to be a bit more flexible, especially during the daytime. And to be as compact and nimble as possible, I used the internal batteries in the camera. I had 3 with me at all times and I ended up using only 1 per day because, like I said, I wasn't shooting that much. And in terms of media, I used the CF Express by Wise, and I had a couple of them, a 640GB and a 320GB. And since I'm talking about the camera, I will do a 6 months review of the 6K full frame, so stay tuned. And for stills, I had my iPhone of course, but also the Fuji X100V. And as always, all the gear will be listed below. I've had so many questions about shooting handheld for this video, so I thought I would address this now. So yes, this entire video was shot handheld. No tripods, no gimbals. As you can see in the video, every single shot is pretty much static. There's a bit of movement when I'm looking up, when I'm panning left to right or tilting up and down, but it's very subtle. I'm used to shoot like this. I've always done that with these cameras especially, and having an IS lens obviously helps. I'm quite stable. There's a way that I like to shoot with my arms locked in. I've made a whole video on shooting handheld, so feel free to check that out. But essentially, every single thing was shot the same way. So with IS, pretty stable, and in post, in Final Cut, because that's what I edit with, I hit the stabilize button, and there's also an option called tripod mode. When that was available, that's what I was hitting, and it worked really well. But like I said before, the shots were already quite stable, so here are a couple of examples of the B-roll files. And as with all of my travel content, I never shoot more than 10 seconds at a time unless I'm doing like, let's say a time lapse or something that's actually like happening in front of me that I need to capture the whole thing. So 10 seconds or 7 seconds or 3 seconds, depending on how long I use in the edit, is actually a lot easier to stabilize. And I did shoot in 36 FPS for a few shots as well. Now, I've had a lot of questions as well about the nighttime shots, and I think it's because of the camera rather than them being nighttime shots. And yes, so I shot everything at f4 at 1250 or 2000. During the day I was on ISO 400. And in DaVinci Resolve, there's an option to denoise, and it works very, very well. So my settings were 5 frames in beta, and the luma was roughly between 5 and 15 depending on the shots. And obviously I had noise, yes, but it was easily fixed, and in the final edit you can't see anything pretty much, and you can get that kind of like dark contrast and those really deep blacks as well. So I was really happy with it, and to me there's not a lot of difference between shooting with a 6K Pro and this new 6K full frame in terms of denoising. And like I said before, I will also touch on color grading later on this video because it's an important part of the final product. So the concept and idea behind this travel video was to capture the quiet moments with a touch of minimalism. In my travel work, I always try to put the emphasis on pure composition instead of movement. I'm not a big fan of all those crazy transitions and those funky effects. I want my audience to be immersed in a video, not reminded that they're watching one. I also like the idea of capturing one of the busiest places on earth in a very calm way, and that's why you also don't see a lot of people in the video. It's very similar to my Friends of Australia video in that regard. And since I was only filming a few times per day, I really had to pick only the shots that I really wanted or needed in order to make this video, so it's more of a collection of moments rather than a typical travel video, if that makes sense. My goal was to film a mix of iconic scenes that scream New York, but also create some more unique frames. Okay, so now let's get into the actual breakdown. So I'm gonna use the actual frames of the video rather than play the video in real time, just because I feel like there's so many shots in a video and I want to really focus on the frames that I find interesting or unique or my favorite ones. I'm going to use my iPad for this because I think it'll be a lot easier to show you the intention and the composition behind each of the frames. This is probably one of my favorite shots as it is so iconic. So for this shot, essentially, I wanted to frame the Empire State Building to really draw your eye to this. And I waited for the light to hit the building, as you can see here, and that created contrast between the brighter part of the image and also the building on the right here. So basically you had no choice but to look. I think also that the clouds helped detach the building from the sky because this was a static shot, so having the cloud in the background kind of moving slowly really helped in having that 3D effect. I was standing up and looking up with the lens at around 80 to 100 mil, trying to get as steady as possible. And I spent around 20 minutes like this in various spots around the same kind of square. I really hurt my back, but it was worth it. And this was in front of Macy's, if you want to know the exact same spot. So there's a few versions of these shots because like I said, I just spent like a bit of time there, but I followed the same principle every single time and I was exposing for the light hitting the tower. I always have my false color on and off to toggle, so I make sure that I can have that green hitting the building. So yeah, like I said, there's a few different shots, but they all follow the same approach. So making sure that the building here is standing out and having this kind of like darker buildings to kind of frame the Empire State Building. Next, we have a very similar shot in a way that it also features the Empire State Building, but this time we higher up on top of the Rockefeller Center for a different perspective. So this was shot at around 9 AM. I booked the first available slot. And when I thought about filming in New York, this is what I wanted, this is what I had in mind, that kind of like iconic view. With this shot, and I think it's kind of easy to see, I wanted the Empire State Building bang on the middle. You can see how the frame is really split in half or in four, depending on how you look at it. It's a very safe shot for sure, but I think it's effective in showing how massive the city is and also how beautiful a concrete jungle can be. The light was quite harsh though, even at 9 AM, so I had to basically expose for the sky. And I didn't mind if the foreground was getting a bit darker because it created that depth between that side that was slightly darker here and this one I was getting already the light. Having a zoom was great for this because I could go from wide to normal or tight in a second to get the most out of the spot. And I stayed around 1 hour on top, if you're interested in going and filming as well, and basically shot all around, like I said, from different focal length. And with this kind of shot, you can really see the detail that the camera is able to get. In terms of aperture, I was going from 8 to f11, as I didn't need a crazy shallow depth of field and I didn't want to use the VND at full capacity. I did shoot wide open for these shots later on, as I really wanted the subject in the foreground to be detached from the background. And I think this is a great example of why a full frame camera can be quite useful, because even at f4 with a kind of standard lens, you still get that separation between the layers. Another type of shots that I was able to get from up there was these compressed ones. And I love shots like these, like full shots, because you can really feel the density of the city of New York. And I love how the light kind of slashes through and creates these little like pockets of light throughout the image. And I think this makes for a very interesting frame because you get layers and the depth. And I think I was the only one pointing downward, at least on these buildings. That was interesting. Everyone was kind of looking at the views and I was focusing on these kind of like darker, kind of like not named buildings. But I really like this, and this is a shot that I knew I wanted to get before I even left. So throughout the video, I show several shots from Central Park, and that is why I loved going to New York in autumn. The colors you get on the trees are beautiful, and we got super lucky with a very sunny day. Normally I don't like bright days, but this worked very well to get those reflection shots. Again, I exposed for the sky. That was definitely the brighter part of the image. This was very bright, but also all the foliage here was quite dark, so I had to find a happy middle in terms of exposure. In terms of composition, I really like to split the frame horizontally. I think I did for the whole of Central Park. And I think this is why, again, Open Gate is so interesting, because you essentially get two normal kind of wide CinemaScope frames into one, if that makes sense. I don't think I would have been able to get a shot like this at 24 or 35mm and get both the building and the water if it was shot on a regular aspect ratio. And even though I prefer less colorful and darker images in general, I was happy to film Central Park that way because it added contrast to the colder tones in the rest of the video. And speaking of colors, here's a quick word about today's sponsor, FilmConvert. I've had a lot of comments and compliments on the grading in this video, and as with most of my work, this entire video was graded using FilmConvert. I've talked about it on the channel many times before, but essentially FilmConvert enables you to add film color and grain to your videos. They have a selection of film stocks to choose from, and you have also Cine Unlocked versions, which means that you can actually dial the contrast and saturation of the stocks. And they have real film grain, which is what I love, and they also even now have a halation add-on. As with all of my travel videos, color grading is a very important part since it is all about visuals. This one was actually challenging because I had both dark and bright scenes, and also very colorful and muted ones. As always, I really wanted that organic look. I didn't want a super clean image, and I've actually used quite a bit of grain, around 30 to 35. And I also wanted real contrast and saturation. In terms of film stock, I used the 5207 as always. For this video, I found myself to go towards warmer tones for the highlights and also towards colder tones for the concrete and the shadows. I found it harder to grade buildings and cities compared to landscapes, for example, but I was very happy with the look that I was able to create with these images. I also thought about doing a black and white edit, so let me know if this is something that you would like to see. If you want to know more about FilmConvert, I made a dedicated video where I discuss my color grading process, so feel free to watch it. And don't forget to check out the link in the description to get 10% off FilmConvert. Now I want to talk about the nighttime shots. So these were shot moments after sunset, and I used ISO 1250 and 2000 at f4. And like I said, I denoised them a bit in DaVinci as well. So out of this, I really wanted the window lights to pop. So I actually shot quite low in terms of exposure to really make the windows pop against the dark of the buildings. And my histogram was all the way to the left at this time. And I also like to be able to see that kind of like light disappearing in the background. This to me is such a typical New York scene that I always see in movies and TV shows, and is also the last one that I filmed in the entire trip. In post, I did warm up the highlights to get that color contrast between these tones and the cooler ones of the water and the rest of the sky as well. I also like that I was going from kind of like dark to light to dark to create that kind of like sandwich, I guess. With this shot, I wanted the iconic skyline look and to have the building cutting the sky and have that recognizable profile. This is where I also got this shot, which I love and is a perfect example again of what shooting 3x2 allows you to do creatively. I was able to fit both the skyline here and the bridge above and have that massive negative space in the middle, which I think works really well and really gives you that sense of height. Now I want to discuss all the looking up shots. As always, when I travel, I like to do this, but New York is on a different level. And I think it's one of the best ways to transport the viewer in the city and showcase how tall it really is. So for example, this was the first shot that I got arriving next to a hotel, followed by this one. This is one of my favorite shots. And what I was trying to do with this and the other ones looking up as well is to really fill the frame with concrete, but still leave a bit of sky here to show scale. Then we have these ones. I love the show Succession, and this is basically a recreation of some of the shots in the opening credits. These were shot near Wall Street, and I actually did watch a few episodes before landing to kind of get in the mood. Normally I wouldn't shoot something like this, I think, well, at least not at that time of day, because you can see here the light is ridiculously bright, the sky is super blue. But what I like about this is like all those like line, and I think New York is very much about this, or any big cities, it's just kind of like leading lines. And when you add a bit of like panning, I think I did this kind of like left to right pan a few times, you really had that kind of like sense of like immersion in the city, and I really like this. And I think now that I think about it, I probably spend a third of my time shooting in New York just bending my back in like weird positions, but for shots like this, I think it's worth it. This is Alwyn Court. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. I didn't know about this last time, 10 years ago when I went, but it got quite popular on Instagram recently and I thought I would check it out as well. This wasn't easy to frame because of the size of the building, but also because it's a very, very busy intersection. So in terms of composition, I decided to fill the entire frame with the interesting pattern covering the building, and I really like this shot. I placed the building right in front and in the middle just because of its shape. And I played around with a different kind of like level that you get in the building, and when you look at it like this with the markings, it really shows how much of a grid it is, and this is something that I've done throughout the video as well. Then I ended up changing focal lengths just to get more or less compression. Something that I noticed as well, and I've used in a couple of shots in that spot in particular, is these little yellow lights here. I think it really gives like a contrast between the color of the wall and the light itself, and I kind of like that it was also reflected in this in terms of like little patches of warm colors. I spent about 30 minutes there, and I also got some shots of the actual light changing from like red to green or green to red, as I thought it made for an interesting frame. Next we have Dumbo. So this spot is in Brooklyn and it's amazing, but it is so packed that it makes it very hard to film as you have a lot of people everywhere. So I had this shot in my mind from the movie Once Upon a Time in America, and that was basically my inspiration for these scenes. So for these I exposed for the sky because it's quite bright, and also the bridge in the background here. And I really like that because it created that contrast with the dark of the buildings on the side here. So again, you have no choice but you kind of like look that way. And again, the height of the frame really creates that perspective with those lines in the windows, and it's quite a symmetrical frame, but I really enjoy that. And apart from the water shots, I also tried to get several ones when I was using compression to make the bridge even bigger. It was also nice to be able to feature the Empire State Building. And I also filmed from quite a low angle every single time to either fit an entire scene like this one, and also shot some scenes with people kind of like crossing the frame just to get a bit of movement happening, because I was doing so much of the static shots, especially in that spot. What I like about Dumbo as well, especially at that time of day, this was about like 2 or 3 p.m, so the sun was getting slightly lower, is the light always hitting the bricks here, and it creates a contrast again in color between the sky and the bricks here. So the next scene is the Oculus Center. Again, I found out about this on socials, and even though it's just a train station with people and white walls, it is such an interesting shape that it is one of my favorite places to shoot and one of my favorite shots. So I shot this from both ends of the station, and I'm basically focused on the 3 leading lines. Sometimes you find a place like this that doesn't really need much to improve on in terms of cinematography. All I had to do was expose for the light that was coming here from the roof, and in post I did cool down the light here to create again the contrast and color with warmer tones from the stores down there. I only got 3 shots in this spot, but they all made it into the final edit. So this last scene is a sunset scene, and one that I knew I could get since I had filmed the exact same thing 10 years ago, but this time I had different gear and experience, so it was very fun to revisit. For this particular shot, I wanted the people to be silhouetted against the sunset. So I exposed for the sun here and basically let everything else fall into darkness. Like you can see here, or even the people, this is completely dark. But I think it really helps in creating like a rich image, if that makes sense. For this entire sunset scene, I was using the rule of third. As you can see, the image is quite split in 3, and I was featuring a lot more sky with a bit of water at the bottom. And the overall composition was also based on the clouds and their shape and their movement. And having the sun hit the water here also helped in creating that depth. So we kind of go from like light to dark to light. There's different layers, and this is something that I like to do. And for this I did the exact same thing, except I just kind of like waited for the sun to be slightly lower to be able to get that crazy rays. But again, it's the same principle, kind of rule of third, light hitting the water, and we go from like light to dark to light to dark to light. For some reason I didn't try anything else. This is what I had in my head, and that's the shots that I got. And I think it's the same case as the Oculus Center. I only shot 5 shots there, and I think they're all in the final edit. I think that's it for me for today, guys. As I mentioned before, I didn't shoot much on that trip, only 54 minutes. But I was happy with pretty much every single clip that I captured, which is very rare for me. Thanks again for the great feedback on Frames of New York. I really hope that you've enjoyed this breakdown and that it made you want to go to New York and shoot as well. And I also want to thank my mom for taking me there in the first place, and for being patient with me, and for also minding my bag when I was standing on the street awkwardly with my camera pointing at the sky. Let me know if you have any more questions. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Also, feel free to check out my 2 ebooks, Freelance Documentary Filmmaking and Travel Cinematography, where you can find a streamlined but comprehensive overview from pre-production all the way to marketing, built on years of my own experience shooting short documentaries and travel videos around the world. And if you are interested, I'm also doing filmmaking mentoring sessions when you can ask me anything about a wide variety of topics.